Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Lunch and Learn. I want to welcome you. I hope you guys have had an excellent week and happy Friday. Sorry for the camera in the background. I am working on, I just finished a video about how to run hybrid chapter meetings for the Council of Chapters. And so that's why I have this camera back here. I'll show you kind of what it looks like. So I was thinking about doing a how I do the lunch and learns. Now it'd be something I'd have to pre-record, but if there's any interest in that, you could drop your comments in the chat and let me know. And one more thing, I haven't created a graphic yet, I'm sorry, for the lunch and learn next week. It's gonna be a Zoom meeting. So it'll be limited to 200 participants because that's all we have on our Zoom account. And we're gonna be talking about Spanish language outreach. So I have a new video of some sun and shade plants, and it's all in Spanish, but it'll be subtitled in English. And I want to premiere that and then discuss, Spanish language outreach activities. So I'm looking forward to that, and look for that email in your inbox on Monday. All right, and without further ado, turn this meeting over to Dr. Minteer.
Okay, good. Well, I guess good afternoon at this point. Let me share my screen. Okay, Valerie, is that one coming through? Okay, perfect. So I'm very happy to be here this afternoon. Thank you to Valerie for inviting me. We'll talk to you all a little bit about biological control of Brazilian peppertree in Florida, and what we've been doing the last couple of years since we have gotten our release permits. So I know this group knows a lot about native plants, and we will talk a little bit about invasive plants today. So just as kind of a background to kind of bring you up to speed. So invasive plants are non-native plants. And so in order to be considered an invasive, a plant species has to be non-native. Native plants cannot be invasive. They can be weedy. They can definitely be problematic. But in order to be considered an invasive plant, we have to be non-native. Along with that non-nativity, you also have to the plants have to cause harm in some sort of way. So non-native plants that can cause harm. And these plant species can cause harm in all sorts of ways. They can have or cause harm to the environment. So they do things like crowd out and outcompete native vegetation, as you can see in this picture right here. So this is old world climbing fern, and this is actually a tree island in Loxahatchee. And you can see these ferns will grow up all the way over these trees. There's nothing growing underneath this climbing fern. And so you're outcompeting native vegetation. This, of course, then reduces forage and habitat for our native fauna. So it's not just plants that are negatively impacted. You can also alter fire regimes and alter water flow. As you can imagine, some of these calming plants, if you have a fire, can carry these fires all the way up into the tree canopy, which is of course not where we want them. And aquatics can be really bad at altering water flow. The aquatics also can threaten commercial, agricultural, and recreational activities. So this up in the top right is a infestation of water hyacinth. It's impossible to get ships or boats through this. An airboat can get through it just fine, but they're interconnected mats. And on the bottom right is tropical soda apple, which was a major pest in cattle ranches not that long ago, actually. So before a biological control agent was released for that one. And so can really cause harm to the economy through threatening commercial recreational activities. They can also cause harm to human and or animal health. And so there's a lot of our invasives that are poisonous to livestock, things that can cause rashes. Brazilian peppertree is one of these. Brazilian peppertree is a member of the Anacardiaceae, which is the plant family of things that make you itchy and scratchy. So things like poison ivy, poison oak, mango for sensitive individuals. And so if you are causing harm to human or animal health, it can also be considered invasive for some of these non-native plants. Now, Florida has a little over 4,700 plant species in the entire state, and about a third of them are non-native. So almost 1,500 non-native species of plants. Now, not all of these non-native species are considered invasive. They're just non-native, but if they're not causing harm, they're not considered invasive. So remember that two-pronged definition of invasive species. Now, you're not expected to be able to read this. It's very, very small print. You can go to the Florida Exotic Pest Plant Council's website. It's now the Florida Invasive Species Council, but you can find these lists there. They categorize the worst of the worst invasive species. And so you might be able to see over on the left is category 1 and over on the right is category 2. Now, the Florida Invasive Species Council defines category 1 species. These are the worst of the worst. So these are invasive species that are altering native plant communities. So we're changing community structures or ecological functions or hybridizing with natives. So these are really affecting our native plant communities. And so these are the worst of the worst. And we have about 81 species that the Florida Invasive Species Council classifies as the worst of the worst. Category 2 plants are exotic plants that have increased in abundance, but are not yet altering plant communities. And these are kind of the invasive plants you kind of want to keep an eye on. Category 1 species you would never want to have in your yard, period. In fact, you want to actively remove these. Category 2, you should really consider taking them out if you own land and you have some of these category 2s, because most of our category 2s don't usually drop off the list, they become category 1s. And so you definitely want to pay attention to these. And category 2s, we have about 85. So, between 160, 170 different plant species that are kind of the worst of the worst. And that's a lot. I mean, that's a lot of invasive species to be dealing with. And these are just kind of the worst of the worst. We definitely have many more that are not on this list. Well, how do you control them? We know that they're bad. We know that they're taking over and shading out or outcompeting our native plant species. How do we get rid of them? Well, the first is cultural control. So cultural controls are removing something that a plant species needs to survive. So things like water or sunlight or CO2. So these are things like weed covers, mulches, drawdowns of lakes in the case of aquatics. Mechanical control, which is the physical disruption or removal of a plant species. These are things like fire, mowing, hand pulling. Chemical control is, of course, the use of herbicides in order to spray these things out and be able to kill them. Now, all of these things work to kill plants, and they can work very, very well if they are done properly. The problem with these 3 methods of control when you're talking about landscape level invasive plants is that these things work great on the small scale, right? Like you can put weed guard down in your garden and you're going to keep out most of your weeds, right? You can mow your field and keep out some of these things. Fire works great. Don't set your backyard on fire, but controlled burns are really, really good for doing this. But when you're talking about the level of infestation like Brazilian peppertree, you're not really going to touch the water scale infestation, right? And so they work great on smaller scales in distinct areas, but as far as landscape level weeds, we need another control tactic, and that's where classical biological control comes in, and that's what I'm going to talk most about today, is the use of classical biological control for Brazilian peppertree. Now, classical biological control is the use of natural enemies to reduce the density of an invasive weed. Now, this does not eradicate a pest. It will never eradicate a pest. It's just going to lower the density. So here is a picture of a pond. Actually, you can't really tell it's a pond, but it is a pond in Australia that's covered in salvinia. And this is pre any control methods. And down at the bottom is a couple months after the release. Oh, all my pictures disappeared. After the release of the weevil. And so this is the Salvinia weevil that you'll see in the next slide. It did not completely eliminate the Salvinia here. Like there's very small patches kind of in here. It's kind of hard to see on that picture, but I would be very happy with that if that was my pond. And this is just using the Salvinia weevil. And so very, very small weevil, but did a spectacular, that I don't know what just happened with that, but I had talked with Valerie about using Zoom, and so okay, we're gonna move on. So okay, so the introduction of this weevil, pretty spectacular control. This is not always how it works. Sometimes it's a lot less noticeable, but this is a really good example of some successful biological control. Now, this was just the insects. There was no herbicides. There was no collecting of the weeds or harvesting or anything. Now, the theory behind classical biological control is based on the enemy release hypothesis. And so we had talked about how invasive species are non-native, which means they are not from here. And so in their native range, so say Brazilian pepper in Brazil, Brazilian pepper is not a problem with plants. It's always grows in the right spot. It's, just a very natural part of the environment. And part of the reason for that is because in Brazil, Brazilian peppertree has a whole suite of co-evolved natural enemies. So we're talking the pathogens and the herbivores that feed on the plant species in Brazil. And what this does is it comes at a cost, right? So Brazilian pepper has to defend itself against this suite of natural enemies. And because it's defending itself, that takes up a lot of resources. And so the plant can't compete as well in Brazil because it's having to defend itself. Well, these plant species are often brought over without those co-evolved natural enemies. And so we don't have any herbivores, we don't have any pathogens. And so this frees up all of those resources here. And so they can use those resources to be able to grow faster, to be able to produce more fruit, to be able to vegetatively reproduce more quickly than our native plants, which are over here on the left, right? So our native plants are having to defend themselves against their co-evolved natural enemies. And we got Brazilian pepper over here that's just, doing whatever it wants because it's not having to defend itself. So classical biological control goes back to the native range of these plant species and brings them here. And after extensive testing to ensure that they will be safe, they are brought into the introduced range and reunited with their host. And this will reinstate some of that natural control. Now, we talked about some other control methods and kind of the positives and negatives with that. Biological control is safe because it's host specific, and we're not really talking about the process today because we're talking about Brazilian peppertree, but I'm happy to talk to anybody about the safety of this, and I'm sure it'll come up in the Q&A. But biological control works on much larger areas, right? And for several reasons. Insects are self-perpetuating. So insects make more insects, right? Once we put them out, they will make more insects. They will spread. They will cause more damage on the plant without really our human involvement. They also move, and so they can spread into new areas on their own. Things like herbicides and mowing and harvesting and hand pulling don't do that on their own. It constantly takes human investment. And so this is a very high return on investment because once we get these insects established on the landscape, they kind of do our job for us. Biological control is also environmentally friendly because oftentimes we can reduce pesticide use and use of other control methods entirely. So a lot of positives here, especially when you're talking about landscape level weeds. Now, with any control method, there are negatives, and biological control is no different. The negatives with Brazilian peppertree are that we have an extremely high upfront cost. And so I kind of hinted at earlier about the amount of time and energy we spend on doing experiments to make sure that these insects are going to be safe to release in the new area. And so that takes a long time, upwards of 10 years, getting these things to make sure that they're safe. And so that does cost a lot of money before we can ever release anything. Biological control is slow, both in the finding something to be able to use to control these pests, as well as once we put them out. When we put the insects out, we're not going to take care of Brazilian pepper overnight. It will very likely take many years, and it's going to be a very slow process. It will not eradicate the pest. As we get less Brazilian pepper, there's going to be less resources for our insects because they only feed and reproduce on Brazilian peppertree. As you have less resources for the insects, you're going to get less insects, right? And so I like to say that the biocontrol agent controls the weed, and then the weed controls the biocontrol agent, and they kind of work in equilibrium. As you get less insects, you're going to get slightly more plants, therefore giving the insects more food, and the insects are going to follow, right? And they kind of work in equilibrium after that. And sometimes it just doesn't always stick. There are lots of things that are outside that do not occur in the lab, right? Like harsh temperatures, hurricanes, things that will eat the insects, right? So our insects become integrated into the outside world. And sometimes they don't always establish because of those things, right? Because they don't survive a hurricane very well, or because there are other things that eat them and they can't build up the numbers. We do a lot of tests inside the lab to make sure that they are as well matched to the environment as possible, but sometimes they still don't do very well outside. Moving on to Brazilian peppertree. Brazilian peppertree is native to South America, and so you can kind of see in the outlined section of this map here. So it's native to Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay. It was introduced as an ornamental in the late 1800s. So it's definitely has been here for quite some time. Get my laser pointer out. It can grow up to 13 meters tall, which is pretty big. You don't see it super tall here very much, but in Brazil, it can definitely be a very, very tall tree. They can live up to 35 years. And it flowers from September to October, which is one of the reasons why beekeepers really, really like it, because that's kind of a period of time where there's not a whole lot flowering out there. You also get bright red berries between November and February, which is why they call it Christmas berry or Florida holly. And these bright red berries are, of course, spread by birds, mammals, gravity, water, pretty much anywhere. And I'm sure you guys have seen it. You get it along fence rows a lot because the birds will feed on the seeds and then defecate and cause more infestations. And the birds have spread Brazilian peppertree pretty much throughout peninsular Florida. So has clobbered the peninsula. It has started to pop up in the Panhandle in some areas as well. And I would assume that it will at some point be spread throughout the at least coastal areas of the Panhandle. The plants do not like cold weather, and so I think that will keep it out for more northern regions, kind of in the center of the state. It gets very, very sparse kind of in these areas, but coastal regions, it thrives. It's a coastal plant in Brazil as well. It is not just our problem. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm sure Hawaii is not happy with sharing our problem with us, but it's definitely very prevalent in Hawaii. It's also starting to become a problem in Southern California and Southern Texas, and we also have some in some of the other Gulf Coast states too, but very small infestations in these areas, but very likely to spread in coastal regions for sure. So it spreads, or it infests about 700,000 acres in Florida. Like I said, a lot of Brazilian peppertree out there. It invades many habitats, from mangroves to sawgrass marshes to pine forest. It literally, it will grow almost anywhere. I've literally seen it growing out of the sides of other trees. It like, if a berry gets put there, it will attempt to grow. So these plants can also provide habitat and resources for other invasives, invasive insects and animals like the citrus root weevil and the black spiny-tailed iguana. We talked about earlier about how this can also degrade habitat and resources for our native species. So these can actually threaten some rare and state-listed species like cluster vine, beach star, and the very charismatic gopher tortoise. It degrades gopher tortoise habitat pretty readily. So, so not great there. We also talked a little bit about how it's allergenic. So this picture, this is actually a rash from Brazilian peppertree. People who are particularly sensitive to it can have chest pains and headaches and get flu-like symptoms, especially when this plant is flowering. Sometimes if it's ingested, especially if you're really sensitive, it can be toxic to humans, livestock, and birds. Birds actually can become intoxicated by eating these berries. So I don't know if you guys have ever seen birds after they've ingested a lot of this, but they definitely are intoxicated with this. If you've ever seen the tricolor peppercorn grinders at your store, very often the red berries are Brazilian pepper. And so if you are sensitive to Brazilian pepper, maybe avoid that pepper grinder, but those are usually the red berries in those is Brazilian pepper. So what makes Brazilian peppertree so aggressive? Well, it's tolerant to shade and to fire, drought, salinity, and so it really can grow almost anywhere. It's allelopathic, which means that the plant produces compounds that can inhibit the germination and the growth of neighboring plants. So it's almost like plant chemical warfare. This plant species was introduced into Florida twice, once on the east coast of Florida, once on the west coast. These plants were sourced from different regions in Brazil, so fairly far apart. And so we've got two different kind of genetic types. Well, these two genetic types of peppertree hybridized. And so the plants that we have here, most of the plants we have here are these hybrids. They grow faster and produce more berries and are more aggressive than their parent plants. And so good work, Florida, on having more aggressive Brazilian peppertree. These hybrids do not occur in Brazil because these two genetic types don't grow anywhere close to each other. And so we're dealing with a little bit of a different beast here. So this is, of course, causes massive plant growth and fruit production. And we had talked about the birds a little bit earlier. So long distance dispersal by birds, which is often problematic with an invasive. But the good news is that we have two biological control agents that are currently approved to control this plant in Florida. The first is Pseudophilothrips itchni, or the Brazilian peppertree thrips. So that's the one in your upper left-hand corner, and Calophylla latiforceps, or the yellow Brazilian peppertree leaf goller, and that's in the bottom left-hand corner. Both of these insects feed on the growing tips of the Brazilian peppertree plant. So those young, tender leaves are usually red or orange, sometimes a purplish color, and you see that on the picture on your right. So first we'll talk about Calophylla, or the leaf goller. These insects were found in Bahia, Brazil, where you can see that little green star here. So this is northeastern Brazil. This is a very subtropical to tropical area, very warm. These insects The adults are free living and can move. The immatures are leaf gallers, and so we'll talk about that here in the next slide. The females lay eggs on the margins of the leaf, and you can see these very small eggs here on the edge of the leaf. After the eggs hatch, the first stage is called the crawlers because they are going to crawl onto usually the upper surface of the leaf, sometimes the lower, but usually the upper surface, where they find a good spot to get cozy, where they will spend the next, 35 to 40 days, because they don't move at this point. So basically they insert their mouth parts directly into the plant, and they are sucking up the plant juices for the next 35 or 40 days while they're creating this nice little pit gall. It's called a pit gall because if you actually pop them out, it looks almost like a little cereal bowl, and completely round at just a half sphere. And so these act as a nutrient sink to the plant and can really cause a reduction in growth because they're just sitting there feeding the entire time. After about 40 to 45 days, they emerge as adults and the cycle starts over again. Now, for the host specificity testing, so determining exactly what these insects will eat and reproduce on, they found, so this was work done by Diaz et al. In 2015, they found that these insects would lay eggs on multiple species of plants. So you've got Shynus terbirethifolia right here. This is Brazilian peppertree. So by far the most eggs on those. Here's two species congeners. So these are not native plants. We don't have any native Shynus in the US, but so they do lay eggs on these congeners. And here's a couple other plant species that they laid eggs on, but not nearly as many as on the Brazilian peppertree. This one's poison ivy. I think maybe people would have been okay with a little bit of feeding on poison ivy, but they did lay a couple eggs on poison ivy. But the good news is that they did lay eggs. However, the eggs either dried and did not hatch, or the crawlers could not make a successful gall on any plant species other than Brazilian peppertree. So here is pistachio, and you can see here these dark sections of the leaf. That's where crawlers came to the surface of the leaf and tried to initiate galling. This is after 16 days. There was absolutely no, aside from this cosmetic damage, there was no damage to the growth or health of those plants. On the top, this is Shynus molly, which is Peruvian peppertree. It's an invasive in California. And this is after 30 days. And so you can kind of see the nymphs tried to establish, but these also died. And this is what the nymphs look like after 30 days on Brazilian peppertree. So, fat, happy, very plump, and getting ready to emerge as adults. So these insects are very host specific. They will lay eggs on a couple plant species, but eggs don't feed, and so therefore don't cause damage. And the real damage comes with the nymphs, and they will only develop on Brazilian peppertree. Now, what do these insects do? So we know that they're host specific, but do they do any damage? Because that's what we pay them for, right? So these insects do cause reduced plant growth. So in the upper right-hand corner, you have two plants. The one on the left didn't have any insects, and the one on the right did. So you see definitely stunted growth. The plants that had insects on them tend to be 1.5 times shorter than plants without the insects. They do cause leaf drop, and are the leaves to be deformed. So you can kind of see a deformed leaf here. These are emerged galls, and so this plant's just not healthy. And in high infestations, we'll actually get the leaves to drop, which is, the leaves are of course the powerhouses of the plant. If you don't have any leaves, you're not growing too well. And so they definitely do reduce plant growth. Now, what's the status on this insect? Well, we lost the colony probably in January of 2020, and we can't go anywhere, right? These plants these insects live in Brazil. You saw the picture. So they're from Bahia, Brazil. And with COVID-19 travel restrictions in place, we have not been able to get back down to Brazil to recollect these insects. We can only collect these insects in the summer months, which is, of course, our winter. And so the best time to go is November to January. We are hopeful with vaccinations and things that we will be able to go down this November, but with the new variants, we just don't know if that's going to be possible. But we're keeping our fingers crossed. So if you guys would like to keep your fingers crossed for us, that would be great. But so best case scenario, if we do get to go down this winter, we will be releasing these in mid 2022. That's best case scenario. It might have to be even later depending on how the pandemic is going. So that was the not so good news. The good news is that we do have another insect, the Brazilian peppertree thrips. These are sourced from slightly further south. These were collected in Ouro Puerto, Brazil, as you can see this. Slightly further south, and we do have this colony, and we are releasing them, have been releasing them for the last 2 years. You know, this is the adult thrips here. Even if it's one thrips, it's still with an S. That's a hint from your friendly neighborhood entomologist. Most people will call it a thrip. It's actually a thrips. So this thrips has a face maybe only a mother can love. Most people think that they're not very charismatic. Trust me, they have a great personality. They're really fun to work with, but definitely not attractive. So here's the adult thrips. They will lay eggs on those newly emerging stems, just as the Califia do. The eggs then hatch, and we've got two very small larval stages. These are brightly colored, orange or yellow. They're very, very damaging because they feed a lot. And then we have 3 non-feeding pupal stages that usually occur in the soil beneath the plants, and then the adults come back out. Both the adults and the immatures or the larvae feed on Brazilian pepper. These were also very thoroughly tested to make sure that they will only eat Brazilian peppertree. They were tested on 127 different plant taxa, so very, very extensively tested. Very diverse testing. They were tested on plants from 45 different plant families across 33 orders. And what they found was that these thrips will only feed and develop across multiple generations on Brazilian peppertree and Peruvian peppertree. So that's the Chinese mole we talked about with the leaf collar, and that's the invasive in California. They don't do as well on Peruvian peppertree as they do on Brazilian pepper, but if a biocontrol agent will actually feed on multiple invasive plants, then it's 2 birds, 1 stone. So we don't really mind if they feed or develop on another invasive. These thrips are extremely impactful. So this is work done by Veronica Manrique back in 2014. So let me walk you through this. So this is after herbivory. So the thrips were put on the plants for 30 days and then removed. And they counted the percentage of dried stems. So in this gray bar right here, we've got plants that had the thrips, and in the white bar are plants that had no thrips. So you can see way more percentage of dried stems with the plants that had the thrips on them. As you can see a representative plant over here on the right. And you see what those kind of dried stems look like, right? Because they feed on those growing tips. Now, that's great news. We love to hear that the insects are causing damage. What's really great about these is that they also looked at this 2.5 months after recovery. So 2.5 months after the insects were removed, those plants were just allowed to be in the greenhouse, watered, taken care of. you still have a super high percentage of dried stems on the plants that had the thrips. And so they just don't recover from this damage very well, which is precisely what we want to be able to try to control this. And we have been releasing these in the state. These data were pulled probably 2 weeks ago. And so this is a collaborative effort between my lab here at UF, from a lab at the Florida Department of Agriculture, and 2 lab groups at the USDA ARS lab in Fort Lauderdale. And so far we've released over 800,000 across the state. And to color code some of these counties, the blue counties are counties where we have done 10 or more releases, and the green counties are where we have done between 1 and 10 releases. We recently received some funding from USDA APHIS that will enable us to get a lot more thrips out on the landscape. And so this map will look much different just probably a month from now. So there's a couple of these counties like Palm Beach and Manatee County that are definitely colored in now, Hernando County as well. But we are working to get these out more on the landscape. So far, what we know is successful releases of thrips need to be large. You're not going to release 10 thrips and do any damage. So we haven't had any establishment for releases that are less than 900. Typically, if we have a couple thousand, they do much better. It's also much better if we release multiple times in each spot. Predation is very high on these strips. Evidently, they're very delicious, and when you release them, we've seen them carried off by spiders and fire ants and other ant species. And so we have tried to do cage releases, and so this is basically keeping the thrips where we put them and keeping other insects away from them so that they can become established before they become lunch. Thrips are also very difficult to find. They're very small, just a couple millimeters in length, and so they're difficult to find in a sea of Brazilian peppertree. And so we are working on developing monitoring to be able to better find these on the landscape. This is, of course, the collaborative project with USDA and FDACS as well. But we have been finding damage in the field. And so you can see some of the thrips underneath the Brazilian peppertree leaf here when we are lucky enough to find them. This is sort of early damage here in the upper right-hand corner. These tips start to die back, and eventually they'll curl and fall off. Here's some larval thrips right here and a couple more right here. So you know how small these things are. This is a little bit later damage. So this is early damage. We've got later damage here. You see these leaves have completely fell off, and but you always see this, it's almost burnt looking going down the stem. And so if you see that burnt look and the leaves have kind of started to shrivel up and fall off, it's very likely thrips damage. And here is some even later. So this is a much larger stem that has started to die back as well. So we are definitely seeing damage in the field. Even better, we have seen these spread onto Brazilian peppertree seedlings. As you can imagine, seedlings also have those super young, super tender leaves. And if these thrips are going to negatively impact seedlings, we can really have an impact on spread, right? And so that is super exciting to be able to see that. And it made us think, well, if we are starting to really damage seedlings, then maybe there is some opportunity here to be able to combine biological control with other methods of control like herbicides. So take out the big guys with the herbicides and then have thrips ready to go for anything that regrows, because inevitably it regrows. And what we found so far, and this is preliminary results, we are still doing these experiments, but what we have found is that glyphosate, imazapyr, and triclopyr are 3 of the most commonly used herbicides in the field. What we need to do is we need to make sure that those chemicals aren't killing our thrips, because dead thrips don't feed. And so we actually sprayed thrips with herbicides. And what we found is that, yes, indeed, these chemicals will kill thrips. Now, the good news is that 75% of the thrips survived with glyphosate and imazapyr, which is still going to do damage, right? 75% of your thrips are still going to cause damage. It did kill 50% of the thrips with the triclopyr, which is unfortunately what most people use out in the field. However, we did find that the thrips will actually move away from Brazilian pepper tree that are treated with this herbicide. And so if we leave plants that are unsprayed, they do have the ability and will indeed move from those plants very quickly. And so that's good news. And so we are, I have a graduate student that's working on this project, and she is about to take this to the field level to be able to see precisely what happens when you do this on a large scale. We also have future plans to start a citizen science program. So keep an eye out on this. This is going to be training citizen scientists to be able to release these insects and monitor the impact of the biocontrol agents, which is going to be awesome because I know everybody's excited about this program. Anybody who has Brazilian pepper is extremely excited about this program. And so this will allow us to use dedicated people to be able to get more of these thrips out and to be able to monitor them. As you can imagine, I have a lab of about 9 or 10 people, and we are 9 or 10 people, but we're still only 9 or 10 people, and there's 700,000 acres of Brazilian pepper tree out there. And so we're going to be doing a training program to get more hands out there to get these insects really out on the landscape effectively. I don't do any of this alone. You saw the title slide that had the other scientists that are involved, but they're listed again. We work closely with other scientists at UF, as well as USDA ARS scientists, as well as Florida Department of Ag. And then the people who fund this research are listed here as well, because it definitely takes a village to be able to do these things. Here are our lab social media accounts. If you would like to give us a follow, that's where we usually put up new lab information. We put up informational things as well as information about when our next citizen scientist training program is and things like that. So I think I have time for questions.
You sure do. We have one already. I'll show myself. Wendell Cropper asks, when you're looking for potential biocontrol agents, do you concentrate on leaf feeders? What about fruit or root feeders?
So we actually, when we're going out and looking for them originally, we collect all types of insects. So, and depending on the target, is kind of what we want to look for. So we often do experiments in the lab before we choose an insect to simulate herbivory. So we'll simulate leaf herbivory and simulate root herbivory or fruit, right? In order to try to find the most vulnerable stage or the most vulnerable plant part of a species, right? Because if a plant doesn't do well with leaf herbivory but does just fine with root herbivory, then we would want to find a leaf feeding agent. There are some plants that, especially in other areas of the world, where they're used for landscaping. And so, like down in South Africa, they have a lot of acacia species, and since these are used for landscaping, the public and the government were very against leaf feeders, right? Like you don't want ugly looking plants in your front yard. And so they concentrated on fruit feeders or seed feeders so that they could reduce the spread of those trees. So instead of reducing growth and trying to get rid of the established plants, they were just trying to control the spread. And so they were looking for flower and fruit feeders at that point. So yeah, great question.
Yeah. And so far, the only question in the chat.
the only question. Usually people are not shy.
I know.
I
Come on.
either did a really good job or I can just confuse everyone.
And and we have 50 people on here, so normally. Oh, okay.
Well,
One came in.
okay.
Rich Richmond A, I'm not sure, says thrips cause bud blast in residential landscape. Are the thrips you are introducing the same species as those we battle all of the time?
Yeah, excellent question. Different species. So thrips is the generic entomological term for all of the insects in that group. And so, yeah, no, they're definitely different species. These things don't spread disease, and they only feed and reproduce on Brazilian peppertree and Peruvian peppertree. But yeah, no, excellent question, because there are a lot of thrips species that are extremely problematic. But these are different. So it's one of those things where it's just a common name for that larger group.
Music sports fan 23 asks, can people in Brazil collect the insects and ship them to you if you can't travel to Brazil?
Technically, yes. But due to the government in Brazil, we have yet to get live insects back here. So with any country, they're very protective over their biological resources, and so they tend to. We have all the appropriate permits, but when they get shipped, there's a bottleneck in Brazil with checking things out and making sure that we have the right permits. This is the right insect, and insects in a closed container don't last forever, and so the delays inevitably mean we get dead insects on the other side. And so some countries we've got the process where it's really streamlined, and so we get insects from Australia very often, and it's just fine. But Brazil, it has never worked out. So yes, it's a possibility, but it hasn't worked in the past. So it's just easier to go down there and get them.
Mm-hmm. Eugene Kelly, our policy and legislation chair, says, hooray for the thrips. Are you confident? Which I agree, hooray. So they're currently, going to town and self-sustaining populations, right?
Yes.
The thrips, okay. So he asks, are you confident that the other insect that you mentioned that is not released yet could eventually become self-sustaining?
Yes. So we've done climate matching. The leaf galling insect will do very, very well in southern Florida. It is not going to do as well in like Jacksonville or in some of the more northern reaches, just because it's a subtropical insect. We do have two other species of that group of the Calophyia that are from more southern regions in Brazil, and so they're going to be more cold tolerant. We have almost finished the testing on those, and so we will begin the government approval process as soon as we can finish those up. We don't have any colonies of those, and so we have to go back down to Brazil and get those as well. So those will be very useful in the more northern reaches here.
Awesome. Kenneth Brennan asks, how do the thrips move and how far?
Well, they have very, very small and not very impressive wings. So they can indeed fly. I have been working with them for 5 years and have never seen them do it. So they move primarily through the wind, just like most other thrips species do. So those wings are kind of more like, helping them kind of like use the wind to get kind of where they want to be. So they do move on wind currents, and we have seen them move a couple meters from where we've put them in 4 or 5 months. So not very quick movement. And that could be a couple of things. One, that they just aren't very strong dispersers, which with those small wings, likely. However, they also don't really have the need to move at this point. Like, we have so much Brazilian peppertree that where we've put them, they just haven't really built up large populations in order to be, reducing the amount of resource, and then so have that catalyst or that reason to move.
Yeah, I mean, where we have Brazilian pepper, I mean, you have a whole canal with just,
Yes, right, precisely. And
thousands upon
so if we're moving
thousands.
just a couple meters, then could just be because they just have plenty of food right now.
Mm-hmm.
So we're hoping that we will build up a lot of the thrips, and then therefore they will start to move more quickly.
Mm-hmm. What about like a hurricane?
A hurricane will definitely move these guys around. Yeah. And thank goodness we haven't had one. I don't have any wood. Oh. There you go. Thank you.
We have an offer to become a citizen scientist volunteer with an email. So I'll get that to you. And then a question, okay. How do you become a citizen scientist volunteer?
Well, so we will be doing trainings by county. And so we're going to start in Pasco County and, of course, St. Lucie, because that's where we are. We're working with some extension agents over in Pasco. But it will go out through, announcements will go out through the extension offices in those counties, as well as on our social media pages. I can definitely reach out to you, Valerie, if, when things are listed, because I know people who are in the Native Plant Society are going to be super interested and very well have a very good knowledge base in order to be able to do this. And so I'm happy to send them to you, so you can send them out to the membership as well.
That'd be great. Yeah, you could tag us in social media posts or just send me an email when.
Yeah. Okay.
Ready to go. Okay, and I'll collect people's email addresses. If you want to email them to me, you guys can email me, and I'll make a little spreadsheet so I know when I get them that you need to get it.
That I'm happy to have as many citizen scientists as possible, because that people are the bottleneck here. I mean, we can make the thrips, but we've got to be able to get them out and get them monitored, right?
Okay, I'm just typing. I just put my email in the chat so everybody has that. Okay. Teresa Blanchard said, "It's great that it's not the thrips eating my ficus."
Yes, I'm happy too. I'd like to think that we're pretty good at what we do, and we haven't had any major non-target impacts since like the 1960s. Biological control has changed a lot since the 1970s. Before, they tested them, but the protecting the natives is kind of a new thing, right? Like relatively speaking. And so before, it's like, just please get rid of these thistle plants. We don't care what else it eats. But people definitely don't like that nowadays. And so I have utmost what's the word I'm looking for? Confidence in the fact that these things will definitely not eat anything else.
While we're on the topic of thrips, I wanted to know, have you ever been bitten by a thrips?
I have never been bitten by a thrips. So, I mean, they're pretty small. I mean, maybe I've been bitten, didn't know, but yeah, no, I've dealt with much, much larger insects than thrips. And most of these, they're not interested in me. Like they're, or they're, unless you're a plant, you're probably not going to get bitten by them. I mean, anything with a mouth can bite. And so if you're harassing something, ladybugs bite, which people like are amazed when I say that, unless they're from the Northeast, because Asian lady beetles bite. They're aggressive. So anything with a mouth can bite you. But I've never been bitten.
And a request, did you already say the best way to get rid of Brazilian pepper on your own personal property?
Well, it depends on how much you have. So I get Brazilian pepper that pops up on my land periodically. I prefer and have had really good luck with cutting it down and then applying herbicide to the cut stump. The most important part of that is that you have to apply the herbicide very quickly. And by very quickly, I mean within 10 minutes of cutting the tree down. Once you cut it down, it starts to, cut itself off, and the herbicide won't do a good job. But there's plenty of articles on that on the EDIS website. So that's the University of Florida Extension electronic information system that can tell you, precisely, what kind of herbicide, how much. So I don't want to off the cuff try to tell you that, because that's definitely not my area of expertise. But I've had, if you're dealing with just a little bit of Brazilian pepper, cut it, spray it, the stump, and you should be good to go. If you have a lot of Brazilian pepper, then you probably need to be talking to me about biocontrol. And then, definitely get in on the extension website and find out.
Yeah, and I mean, you can just hack, but keep in mind that it's gonna come back and
It'll
with a
regrow.
vengeance.
Yeah. If you cut it, it will regrow, and it regrows way faster than you think it will.
Yeah.
And so just a few months, it'll be, as tall as it was before, and just laughing right in your face. It's definitely, if you're going to hack it, you have to squirt the stump, or you're going to have it right back.
Yeah. Maria Vasquez asks, what was your favorite part of working on this project?
Oh, I don't know if I've gotten that one before. My favorite part, I don't know, maybe it's got to be either one of two things. One, actually getting to work with the public and getting to release this. Like, people have had so many problems with this plant. And it's not just this plant, it's other plants that we work with as well. Air potato, tropical soda apple, once you get to the point where you've called in the biological control people, this stuff is everywhere, and they have tried everything, right? And so that feeling of being able to help someone, right? Being able to, like, here, this will help, right? And so that has been really truly enjoyable with not just this project, but all projects. And then I love to travel and see new places. And so the fact that I've gotten to travel all through Brazil looking for bugs, I mean, I'm really interested in the bugs, and hence the reason I'm an entomologist. So being able to travel to new places and look for bugs is like the best thing ever.
Oh yes, speaking of bugs, I missed this question from Kenneth Brennan. How do you collect the thrips?
Like in Brazil?
How do you get them?
Oh, so hanging out with Brazilian pepper and looking for them, so finding them, saying, and then we just clip off like sections of the branch and throw them in a container. So they're really small. You can use an aspirator where they basically get sucked up into a vial, but that'd take you forever. You just clip leaves.
You don't have to do it. You just take the plant that they're sitting on.
Yes. Yeah. So just take that branch or whatever.
And they don't bail. They don't really fly away when you clip the branch.
Nope.
So
as long as they have Brazilian pepper, they're kind of happy to just hang out, unless it's been treated with triclopyr, and then they pack up and leave. They definitely don't like it. If anybody has sprayed triclopyr on their plants, it starts to degrade those growing tips very, very quickly, like within the first 24 hours, and will kill the plant in just a couple days. And the thrips immediately start looking for healthy plant material.
Mm-hmm. Well, the Florida Native Plant Society was super excited to hear about your initial success, and we're so happy to see it translate to on-the-ground success. Thank you for your really important work, and we'd love to support you in any way we can.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. It was nice chatting with you all, and I'm sure I will see a lot of you all at the citizen science training programs. So keep your eye out for that.
Great. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.